Hey guys, me again, Cute Mimi here, making yet again another video. I haven't made a top 5/top 10 video for a while, and I think it's time that I get this one out of the way. Most people have been asking me to make a top 5 or top 10 list on my favorite PBS Kids shows. And I want to apologize to my subscribers who have been waiting for this sort of video for a long time. But believe me, it's worth the wait because I had a lot of favorite PBS Kids shows, and I had to narrow down my top 10, so I wish I made this sooner, but as the saying goes, better late than never. Also, something else I'd like to point out is, if any of your favorite PBS Kids shows are not in this top 10 list, then they're more likely to be under the honorable mentions, because, like I said, I have a lot of favorites, and they'll be down in the honorable mentions if I don't mention them. So without further ado, let's get on with my top 10 list of my favorite PBS Kids shows. Number 10. Liberty Kids. I bet you didn't know that this was actually a PBS Kids show. It actually started there first, but then it moved to syndication on local stations, and you know how it goes. And it became part of CBS's Saturday morning schedule. I personally prefer the PBS Kids broadcast because, after the episode, they give you some fun trivia facts and information on during the 1700s. That's what's really cool about Liberty Kids. It's about 3 kids. Their names are Sarah, James, and Henry. And they go on quests, basically making history how it should be, as well as showing how history was. Personally, I think the theme song to this show is great. That's what gives this show a number 10 on my list of favorite PBS Kids shows. In fact, I wish PBS Kids never yanked this off their schedule. PBS, if you're watching this, please put Liberty Kids on your Sunday morning schedule. Number 9. Arthur. Mark Brown was a genius when he made the books, and somebody at PBS thought, hey, we should turn this into a show. And let me just say, this was a good show, to be honest. Basically, it involves important issues on the show, basically, with struggles that everyone else is dealing with, and learning facts and stuff. In fact, Arthur is still on to this day on PBS Kids. This is the longest running PBS Kids show, believe it or not. If you look at the other program they had back in the day, most of everything else is pretty much discontinued. But Arthur is still going strong. He's like the SpongeBob of PBS Kids, if that makes any sense. But aside from that, Arthur is great. Basically, I think the cast is wonderful. I prefer the older seasons compared to the new one, but that's probably just because of a nostalgia factor. But aside from that, I totally recommend checking out Arthur, whether it being the TV series or even the Living Books PC CD-ROMs, as well as the books. They're all really good. Mark Brown is amazing. Number 8. Sesame Street, a classic that's been around for a very, very long time. To be honest, this is one of my favorites from, well, so-and-so. But let me be honest, around 2007 was where the show started to go downhill. Basically, they made some changes that I don't care for. Like, for example, basically, Oscar doesn't live in a garbage can anymore. Cookie Monster is not really much of a Cookie Monster anymore. He actually never was a Cookie Monster to begin with. He was technically a rice cake monster, believe it or not. If you look up videos online, it will say that he rarely eats cookies because eating that much stuff would damage a Muppet. So that's why they basically painted rice cakes to look like cookies. That's why you've been hearing crunchy noises when you eat cookies. Well, when he eats cookies. But aside from that, Sesame Street is a classic. Basically, you got lovable characters like Big Bird, Elmo, Ernie and Bert, Snuffleupagus, and several others. I would name them all, but I could sit here all day and do that. If you want me to make a separate video on my favorite Sesame Street characters, I'd be willing to do that. So, but as of now, we're focusing on my top 10 favorite PBS Kids shows. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Number 7. Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Between this and Where in Time, this is the superior show. I just find Greg Lee and Rockapella more enjoyable than the guys from Where in Time. At least they kept the Chief in that show. We won't forget the Chief. may she rest in peace. Anyway, Where in the World is basically where the Gumshoes, basically you got 3 contestants, they're called Gumshoes in the game, and their job is to track down Carmen as well as one of the crooks in the show. There's Wonder Rat, Victor Slick, Tom Grudge, Serenade, Robocrook, etc., etc. And their job is to track them down. They're given a clue to where they could be hiding. Then the host will ask them, where are they hiding? They show their answers. They guess correctly, they earn Acme Crime Bucks. They start with 50, and each time they get a question right on those kind of questions, it's worth 10. Unless it's the lightning round or the chase, where it's worth 5 Acme Crime Bucks. And afterwards, there's also basically the phone tap, basically where they catch Carmen talking to one of the other crooks in the show. And then there's the final clue, where it's basically kind of like Final Jeopardy, sort of. You're given one of 3 options. If you guess correctly, you wager your Acme Crime Bucks, you earn it. If you get it wrong, you lose it. Then the 2 people with the highest totals will move on to the jail time challenge. The chief will basically explain where the loot, warrant, and crook are located. It's called a photo recon, and you have to find it in the exact order, otherwise you basically lose. And then the one player who basically recalls it correctly moves on to the bonus round, where they get to go anywhere in the world, or basically any of the continents, that is. And yeah, if they track down with all 7 or 8 spots on the board, they win and go anywhere in the world, or in the US, that is, my bad. And if they don't get the 8 right, then basically they get a consolation prize. In conclusion, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego is one of PBS Kids' best game shows, that is. Ralph Ruffman has nothing on Carmen. That's all I gotta say. Anyway, moving on to number 6. Number 6, Between the Lions. Between this and Reading Rainbow, I find this show the superior one, which is why it made my top 10 list, and why Reading Rainbow didn't, but that's under my honorable mentions. It stars basically a bunch of lions. Their names are Theo and Leo, which are the parents, Lyle the lion, who's basically their son, and Leona, which is basically his younger sister. The show takes place at a library, and basically they choose a book randomly, and they read the book, and then basically there's also segments like they take one of the letters A, E, I, O, and U out, and basically they use short vowels or long vowels, or even 2 letters. Like, for example, they take A out, it could be a or A sound. There's also segments like Gawain's Word, which is one of my favorites. I also love Sam Spud, Potato Detective. Great parody of Sherlock Holmes, let me just say. There's also Fun with Chicken Jane, which is basically a parody of Fun with Dick and Jane. There's also Cliffhanger, Hanging from a Cliff, another one of my favorites, especially when Cliffhanger basically screws up. He thinks he's off the cliff, but then things backfire, and he ends up dangling from the cliff. Can't hold on much longer! Overall, Between the Lions is a classic. I definitely recommend checking it out. This is number 6 on my list. Now let's take a look at number 5. Number 5, The Adventures from the Book of Virtues. This is number 5 on my list. And let me just say about this show, it involves 2 kids. They're both 10 years old. Their names are Zach and Annie. In each episode of the series, basically, one of them commits an act contrary to that day's chosen virtue. Whether it's loyalty, compassion, courage, moderation, honesty, you get the point, and suffers pain as a result, being physical or moral. They seek counsel of one of basically the animal friends, which are basically, as you can see on screen, there's basically a bobcat, a hawk, a prairie dog, and a bison. They tell them a story, what's going on, basically what's similar to what's happening to them right now, and it helps them in many ways, shape, or form to get back to life and accept the mistakes they made, and all is good. Let me just say, the stories in this show are amazing. They're well written. I just wish PBS Kids would put this show back on their schedule. I don't care if it's reruns or brand new episodes. I just think this should be back on their schedule compared to most of their trash they have these days. This is number 5 on my list. Now let's take a look at number 4. Number 4. Zoom. This was one of my favorite shows. I'm going to be talking about the version that came out in 1999. I haven't seen the original 70s version, so all I can say is it's kind of similar to the 90s version with a few differences. So basically, it's just the same show with different casts altogether. Now, Zoom stars 7 different kids on the show. Basically, they do stuff like make crafts, make cool snacks, science experiments, stuff like that. There's also segments like where they do games and activities, and my favorite segment as well is Zoom Playhouse, where they do skits and drama by viewers and portrayed by the cast of the show. This is a very good PBS Kids show. I was very mad when they yanked it off their schedule. Zoom was one of my all-time favorite PBS Kids shows from the late 90s, early 2000s. I totally recommend checking out Zoom. As well as the 70s version, even though I haven't seen any episodes of that, but I'm pretty sure it's very identical to the 90s version. All I can say is Zoom is number 4 on my list. Now let's take a look at number 3. Number 3. Wimzie's House. This is actually a Canada show that aired on the CBC channel back in the day. It also aired on Radio Quebec. But this one also aired in America on the PBS Kids channel. Now, it's about Wimzie, who lives with her parents and grandmother and her younger brother, Beau. The basic plot of the show is Wimzie's friends would always come over for a day, and they would play together. But usually it resulted in a problem that would eventually lead to the moral of the episode. Overall, basically, something goes on, and then they all come up with a solution. That's what makes this show enjoyable. In fact, I swear, the same people who made Fraggle Rock made this show. I don't know exactly, but this show makes me think of Fraggle Rock, and that's a good sign, in my opinion. Because I think Fraggle Rock is one awesome show as well. In fact, I'll talk about that in a different video. Overall, Wimzie House is number 3 on my list. Now let's take a look at number 2. Number 2. Bill Nye the Science Guy. This is number 2 on my list. This is actually technically half PBS, half Disney. Now, even though Disney pretty much made the show, it aired on PBS, local PBS station, so technically this is a PBS Kids show, which is why it's being mentioned here on this list. Now, it's about where you learn stuff about whether it being water cycles, moon cycles, energies, plants, food webs, stuff like that, and even storms and stuff. And they made all the segments look really good. In fact, it's just as good as Beacon's World if you've ever seen that show before. I totally recommend checking out Bill Nye the Science Guy. This is number 2 on my list. Now let's take a look at number 1. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've been waiting for. My number 1 favorite PBS Kids show of all time is... good old Zaboomafoo, one of my favorite classics. Basically, the show stars the Kratt brothers, that being Chris and Martin, and their lemur friend, Zabu. Actually, its real name is Huavian, and the show starts off by Chris and Martin running into Animal Junction, or walking into it, and then they find Zabu, and basically, Zabu doesn't speak until he eats a snack. Then he belches and says, excuse me, then says, Zaboomafoo! Wah! Okay, sorry. But that goes to show how much I love this show. And basically, Zabu finds an animal, multiple of them, or just one animal, that is. And then, basically, he describes what the animal is, and then Chris and Martin say, oh, this is the animal. Basically, that's how the show works, and then they go to the closet. I love the closet song that they sing on this show. In fact, it's also funny when the closet falls, the stuff falls out of it. That's what makes this show memorable. And let's not forget the jokes at the end of the show. You can't go wrong with jokes that Zabu says toward the end of the show to Chris and Martin. And the animals, they're all memorable. This show is one of my favorites. Anyway, that's my top 10 favorite PBS Kids shows. Thanks for watching. If you want to share with me your top 10, feel free to write in the comments.